running blind through the... Demon Dactyl came away. It didn't seem such a momentous thing, just a gradual stirring in a deep cave in a far, empty mountain. An unnoticed event, seen by none save the cave worms, and those few insomniacs among the bevy of weary bats hanging from the high ceiling. But the demon's spirit had awakened, had come back from its long dormancy into the statue-like form it had left behind after its last visit to the world called Corona. The tangible, corporal form felt good to the wandering spirit. The dactyl could feel its blood, hot blood, coursing through its wings and mighty legs, could feel the twitching of its mighty muscles. Its eyes flickered open, but saw only blackness. For the form left standing in magical stasis in the deep cave, head bowed and wings wrapped tightly about its torso, had been covered by magma. Most of the fiery stuff of that time long past had bubbled and flowed away from the cavern, but enough had remained to harden about the dactyl's corporeal form. The spirit had come back to Corona, encased in obsidian. The demon's spirit fell deep within itself, summoned its powers, both physical and magical. By sheer will and brute strength, the dactyl flexed its wings. A thin crack ran down the center of the obsidian sarcophagus. The dactyl flexed again, and the crack widened, and then, with a sudden, powerful burst, the beast blew apart the obsidian, stretched its great wings out to the side, clawed tips grasping and rending the air. The dactyl threw back its head and opened wide its mouth, screeching for the sheer joy of the return, for the thoughts of the chaos it would bring again to the quiet human kingdoms of Corona. Its torso resembled that of a tall, slender man, shaped and lined by corded strands of taut muscle, and sporting a pair of tremendous bat-like wings, 20 feet across when fully extended, and with strength enough to lift a full-grown bull in swift flight. Its head, too, was somewhat human, except more angular, with a narrow jaw and pointed chin. The dactyl's ears were pointed as well, poking up about the demon creature's thin tuft of black hair. Neither did that hair hide the creature's horns, thumb-sized and curling in toward each other at the top of the demon's
Definitely a
brow.
good mix.
The texture of its skin was rough and thick, an armored hide, reddish in hue and shiny, as if lit by its own inner glow. Shining, too, were the demon's eyes, pools of liquid black at most times, but shifting to fiery red orbs, living flames when the demon was agitated, a glow of absolute hatred. Creature flexed and stretched, extended its wings to their full glory, reached and clawed at the air with its human-like arms. The demon extended its fingernails, transformed them into hooked claws, and grew its teeth, 2 pointed canines extending down over its bottom lip. Every part of the demon was a weapon, devastating and deadly. And undeniable power though this monster appeared, this demon's real strength lay in its mind and its purpose. The tempter of souls, the twister of hearts, the maker of lives. Theologians of Corona argued over whether the demon dactyl was the source or the result of evil. Did the dactyl bring the weakness, the immorality to humanity? Was the dactyl the source of the deadly sins, or did it manifest itself and walk the world when those sins had festered to the point of eruption? For the demonic creature in the cave, such questions hardly mattered. How long had it been? The dactyl wondered. Creature remembered that long ago time now, savored the thoughts of the streaming blood, as army after army had joined in delicious, desperate battle. It cursed aloud the name of Tyrannon Denonia, who had rallied the humans and the elves, chasing the Dactyl's armies back to the base of this mountain, Aida. Denoniel himself had come to this cave after the beast, had skewered the Dactyl. The black-winged demon looked down at the darker red tear marring its otherwise smooth hide. With a sickening crackle of bone, the creature's head rotated completely around and bowed, examining the second imperfection of its form, a scarred lump under its lower left shoulder blade. Those two scars were perfectly aligned with the Dactyl's heart, and thus, with that one desperate thrust, Denoniel had defeated the demon's corporeal body. Yet even in its death throes, the Dactyl had won the day, using its willpower to bring up the magma from the bowels of Aida. Denoniel and much of his army had been consumed and destroyed, but the Dactyl was eternal. Denoniel was gone, a distant memory, but the demon spirit had returned, and the physical wounds had healed. What man, what elf will take Denoniel's place? The demon asked aloud in its hollow, resonating voice, always seeming on the edge of a thunderous roar. A cloud of bats shuddered to life at the unexpected noise, and flew off down one of the tunnels formed when the lava had flowed from this spot. The Dactyl cackled, thinking itself grand to be able to send such creatures, any creatures, scurrying with a mere sound. And what resolve might the humans and the elves, if the elves were still about, for even in Denoniel's day they had been on the wane, muster this its thought its enemies to those that were as minions? What creatures could the Dactyl gather this time to wage its war? The wicked goblins, certainly, so full of anger and greed, so delighting in murder and war. The Fomorian giants of the mountains, few in number, but each with the strength of a dozen men, and a hide too thick and tough for a dagger to puncture. And the Powries, yes, the Powries, the cunning, warlike dwarves of the kingdom, the weathered eyes, who hated the humans above all. Centuries before, Powries had dominated the seas in their solid, squat barrel boats, whose hulls were made of tougher stuff than the larger ships of the humans, as the primitive Powries were made of than the larger humans. A line of drool hung low from the Dactyl's mouth, as it considered its former and future allies, its army of woe. It would bring them into its fold, tribe by tribe, race by race, growing as the night grows, when the sun touches the western horizon. The twilight of Corona was at hand. Dactyl came awake. Part 1.
I gotta charge it again.
Fate. What song is this? Drift through the trees, to lift men broken on their knees, to untwist hearts from grasping sorrow, to offer the promise of the morrow. Hark, what song, what music sweet, warm whispers of the dawn. Hot blood waft steam in night air cold. What hopes of treasure, what hunger of gold hath brought foul beast from caverns deep to face the night bird, to know endless sleep. They come for greed, they come to bleed at gentle hands of elven breed. Shining swords the horses run, the bane of monsters all and one. To their midst the rider, Nightbird the ranger, flashing tempest's anger, denying the danger, cutting and slashing, tearing and gashing, chasing the nightmares away. Fast run, you goblins. The ranger sets his bow to let your blood to stain white snow. Arrow and arrow, the river of red, fast fall the evil to the one is dead. Hawkwing's fury, goblins to bury in worms' cold domain. Scatter, goblins, fly and flee, you'll not outrun symphony. Hooves of music rend the gloom, bearing nightbirds, know your doom. At tempest's fall, so shall you all, to blackness evermore. Way drifts musk symphony sweet, away goes nightbird, the forest to grief. In springtime sunshine of evil no traces, through flowers and lovers step measured paces. Ah, listen you all, the night birds call, and sleep, peaceful lovers, secure. The Song of the Nightbird. To 1. The Unexpected Kill. Elbrian Wyndon was up before the dawn. He dressed quickly, fumbling with his clothes in the red light of the hearth's glowing embers. He ran a hand through his tousled straight hair, a light brown shock that bleached pale on its top layers under the summer sun. He retrieved his belt and dagger, which he had reverently placed right near his bed. And Elbrian felt powerful as he ceremoniously strapped the weapon about his waist. He grabbed the heaviest wrap he could find and rushed out into the dark and chill air, so anxious that he hardly remembered to close the cabin door behind him. The small frontier village of Dundalis was quiet and eerily still about him, sleeping off the well-earned weariness that followed every day's hard labor. Elbrian, too, had worked hard the previous day, harder than normal, for several of the village men and women were out in the deep forest, and the boys and girls, like Elbrian, who was nearing his teens, had been asked to keep things aright. That meant gathering wood and tending the fires, repairing the cabins, which always seemed to need repair, and walking the perimeter of the sheltered vale that held the village, watching for sign of bear, great cat, or the packs of hunting wolves. Elbrian was the oldest of those children.
Hey James, how you doing?
As it were,
Hey Christopher, how you doing?
Truly,
Hope
he
you're
felt
both doing
well.
well.
This would be the last time he remained behind when the hunters went off on the season's last and most important expedition.
Give me one sec, I just gotta
his 13th birthday. The passage from
go
childhood in the
switch
hardy
this
land
out.
that was the northern wilderness. Next spring, Elbrian would hunt with the adults, the games of his youth left behind. Indeed, he was tired from the previous day's labors, but so full of excitement that sleep had not come to him. The weather had turned toward winter. The men were expected back any day, and Elbrian meant to meet them and lead their procession into the village. Let the younger boys and girls see him then, and afford him the respect he deserved, and let the older men see that the village, under his watchful eye, had fared well in their absence. He started out of Dundalis, stepping lightly despite his weariness, passing through the darker shadows of the small, one-story cabins. Jilly! The call was not loud, but seemed so in the quiet morning air.
Had to switch
Elbrian
this one.
moved
This
up to
one's
the
actually
corner of the
charged
next
up.
house, smiling for his cleverness, and peered around.
Oh yeah.
Could be today, protested a young girl, Jilly, Elbrian's closest friend. You do not know that, Jilly, argued her mother, standing in the open doorway of the
I hope you're doing good, James Money
Elbrian tried
and
to muffle
Christopher.
his snicker. The girl hated that nickname, Jilly, though nearly everyone in the town called her that. She preferred the simple Jill, but between her and Elbrian, the title was Pony, a secret name. the one Giuseppe liked most of all. The snicker was soon gone, but the smile remained, all the wider for the sight. Elbrian didn't know why, but he was always happy when he saw Pony. Though only a couple of years before he would have taunted her and the rest of the village girls, chasing them endlessly. One time, Elbrian had made the mistake of catching Giuseppe without his male companions nearby, and of tugging too hard on her yellow mane to prove the point of his capture. He never saw the punch coming, never saw anything except how wide the blue sky had suddenly seemed as he lay on his back. He could laugh at that embarrassment now, privately, or even with Pony. He felt as though he could say anything to her, and she wouldn't judge him or make merry of his feelings. Candlelight spilled out onto the road, softly illuminating the girl. Elbrian liked the image. Every day that passed, he found that he enjoyed looking at Pony more and more. She was younger than Elbrian by 5 months, but taller than he, standing about 3 inches above 5 feet, while the young man, to his ultimate horror, had not yet reached the coveted 5-foot mark. Elbrian's father had assured him that Wyndon boys were normally late in sprouting. All jealousy aside, Elbrian found the taller Pony quite a pleasing sight. She stood straight, but not stiff, and could outrun and outfight any of the boys in Dundas, Elbrian included. Still, there was a delicate aura about her, a softness that the younger Elbrian had viewed as weakness, but the older Elbrian viewed as oddly distracting. Her hair, which Giuseppe seemed to be constantly brushing, was golden, silken, and thick enough to lose a hand in. It bounced about her shoulders and back with an alluring wildness. Her eyes, huge eyes, were the richest and clearest blue Elbrian had ever seen, like great sponges soaking in the sights of the wide world and reflecting Giuseppe's every mood. When Pony's eyes showed sadness, Elbrian felt it in his heart. When they soared with sparkling joy, Elbrian's feet moved involuntarily in dance. Her lips, too, were large and thick. The boys had often taunted Pony about those lips, saying that if she ever stuck them to a window, they would surely hold her fast for all eternity. Elbrian felt no desire to tease when looking at Pony's lips now. He sensed their softness, so very inviting. I will be back to the morning meal, Pony said. The noise are dangerous, her exasperated. I will be careful, Pony responded dismissively, before the older woman had even finished the sentence. Elbrian held his breath, thinking that Pony's mother, often stern, would scold the girl severely. She only sighed, though, and resignedly closed the cabin door. Pony sighed too, and shook her head as if to show her ultimate frustration with adults. Then she turned and skipped off, and was startled a moment later when Elbrian jumped out in front of her. He reflexively cocked a fist, and Elbrian wisely jumped back. "You are late," he said. "I am early," Pony insisted. "Too early, and I'm tired." Elbrian shrugged.
Cheers, Chris.
And nodded down the road to the north. Then he led the girl off at a swift pace. Despite her complaints concerning the time, Pony not only paced him, but skipped right by him, obviously as excited as he. That excitement turned to sheer joy when they passed out of the town and began their ascent of the ridge. Pony chanced to look back to the south, and she stopped, stunned and smiling, and pointing to the night sky. "The halo," she said breathlessly. Elbrian turned to follow her gaze, and he too could not suppress a grin. Stretched across the southern sky, more than halfway to the horizon, was Corona's halo. A heavenly belt, a subtle tease of colors, red and green and blue and deep purple, a flowing softness like a living rainbow.
Excuse me.
The halo was sometimes visible in the summer sky, but only during the deepest parts of the shorter night, when children and even adults were fast asleep. Elbrian and Giuseppe had seen it on a few occasions, but never so clearly as this, never so vibrant. Then they heard a distant piping, soft music, perfect melody. It floated through the chill air, barely perceptible. "The forest ghost," Pony whispered, but Elbrian didn't seem to hear. Pony spoke the words again under her breath. The forest ghost was a common legend in the timberlands. Half horse and half man, he was the keeper of the trees and the friend of the animals, particularly of the wild horses that ran in the dells to the north. For a moment, the thought of such a creature not so far away frightened Pony. But then her fears were washed away by the sheer beauty of the halo and the fitting melody of the enchanting music. How could anyone, or anything that could pipe so beautifully, pose a danger? Pair stood on the side of the ridge for a long while, not speaking, not looking at each other, not realizing that the other was there. Elbrian felt totally alone, yet one with the universe. A small part of majesty, a small but endless flicker in eternity. His mind drifted up from the ridge, from the solid ground, from the sensible experiences of his existence, into the unknown, exhilarating joy of spirituality. The name of Mother came to him briefly, though he didn't know why. He didn't know anything at that time, it seemed, and yet he knew everything. The secrets of the world, of peace, of eternity. It was all there before him, so simple and true. Felt a song in his heart, though it had no words. Felt a warmth in all his body, though he was not at that moment a part of that corporeal form. The sensation passed too quickly. Elbrian sighed deeply and turned to Pony. He was about to say something, but held the words, seeing that she, too, was immersed in something beyond language. Elbrian felt suddenly closer to the girl, as if they two had shared something very special and very private. How many others could look upon the halo and understand the beauty of the thing, he wondered. None of the adults of Dundalis, certainly, with their grumbling and grouching, and none of the other children, he decided, who were too caught up in silliness to ponder such thoughts. No, it was his experience, and Pony's, theirs alone. He watched her slowly drift back to the reality about them, the ridge, the night, and her companion. He could almost see her spirit flowing back into that 5'3" body, a body that was growing more shapely by the day. Elbrian resisted the sudden and inexplicable urge to run over and kiss Pony. "What?" she asked, seeing turmoil, even horror, come over his face, despite the darkness. The boy looked away, angry at himself for allowing such feelings. Pony was a girl, after all, and though Elbrian would openly admit that she was a friend, such deeper feelings were truly horrifying. "Elbrian," she asked, "was it the song? The forest ghost?" "Never heard it," Elbrian retorted, though when he thought about it, he had indeed heard the distant piping melody. "And what?" Pony pressed. "Nothing," he replied gruffly. "Come along. The dawn is not long away." He started up the ridge at a feverish pace then, even scrambling on all fours at times, crunching through the thick carpet of fallen leaves. Pony paused and watched him, confused at first. Gradually, a smile found its way back onto her face, her dimples showing the slightest blush of red. She suspected she knew the feelings that Elbrian was fighting. The same feelings she had battled earlier that same year. Pony had won that battle by accepting, even relishing those privates. The warmth that washed over her whenever she looked upon Elbrian. She hoped Elbrian would wage a gallant war now, with an outcome similar to her own. She caught up to her friend at the top of the ridge. Behind them, Dundalis sat quiet and dark. All the world seemed still. Not a bird calling, not a whisper of wind. They sat together, yet apart, separated by a couple of feet and by the wall of Elbrian's confusion. The boy didn't move, hardly seemed to blink, just sat staring straight ahead at the wide veil before him, though it was too dark for him to even recognize the place. Pony, though, was more animated. She let her gaze linger on Elbrian until the boy became obviously flustered. Then she politely looked away, back to the village. A single candle was burning in one of the houses, and back to the halo, which was now fast fading in the southern sky. She could still make out the brighter colors, but that special moment of beauty, of innermost reflection, had passed. Now she was again Gilsepine, just Gilsepine, sitting on a ridge with her friend, awaiting the return of her father and the other hunters. And the dawn was approaching. Pony realized that she could make out more of the village, could discern the individual houses, even the individual posts of Bunker Croyer's corral. Today, Elbrian said, unexpectedly, his voice turning her about to study him, he was at ease again, the uncomfortable feelings tossed out with the mystery of the night. They will return this day, he announced with a nod. Pony grinned warmly, hoping he was right. They sat in silence as the day grew about them. In the wide veil, the wall of blackness gave way to the individual dark spots that were the evergreens. Rows and rows of ancient trees, Corona's oldest soldiers, standing proud, though most were not twice Elbrian's height. The starkness of the scene from this vantage point, in this mounting light, amazed the companions. The ground about the trees caught the morning light and held it fast, for the undergrowth was not dark, it was white and thick, a padding of caribou moss. Elbrian loved the stuff. All the children did. Every time he gazed upon the white carpet, he wanted to take off his shoes and pants and run through it barefoot and bare-legged, to feel its softness between his toes and brushing against his shins. In many places, the caribou moss was even deeper than his knees. He wanted to do it, as he had so many times in his earlier years, wanted to cast off his shoes and all his clothes. He remembered his companion, his earlier feelings, and turned away from Pony, blushing fiercely. If they come in before the sun gets too high, we'll see them a mile away, Pony remarked. The girl was not looking ahead, though, but at the ridge to the south behind them. Autumn was well advanced, and all the leaves of the deciduous trees, particularly the sugar maples, were bright with colors, shining red and orange and yellow, painting the ridge. Elbrian was glad that the distracted girl had not noticed his own shade of red. Coming down that side of the veil, he agreed sharply, catching Pony's attention and pointing to the wide, gentle slope of the veil's northeastern face, added, a mile away. Assessment proved over-optimistic, for the starkness of the scene had confused their sense of distance. They did indeed spot the returning hunters, to their complete joy, but not until the group was moving along the bottom of the bowl-shaped veil, a line of tiny forms far below them. They watched, chattering wildly, trying to count and to guess who was leading, but getting confused as parts of the line wove in and out of the tree shadows. A shoulder pole! Elbrian cried out suddenly, spotting the line that seemed to join two of the men. Another! Pony added happily, and she clapped her hands with glee as more came into view. The hunters would return with carcasses, elk, caribou, or white-tailed deer, slung on shoulder poles, and it seemed to the watching pair as if this hunt had been successful indeed. Their patience fast disintegrated. They leaped out together, running fast down the steeper slope, picking their angle to intercept the returning troop. From the ridge top, the vale seemed stark and open, but descending into it, Elbrian and Pony quickly remembered just how confusing and intimidating a place it could be. Down among the squat but wide-spreading pines and spruce, vision in all directions was blocked after just a few feet. The companions became separated quickly and spent many minutes just talking themselves back together and then arguing over which direction would lead them to their fathers. "The sun is in the southeast," Elbrian reminded Pony, squaring his shoulders as he took command of the situation. The sun had not yet come up high enough to peer over the rim of the vale, but they could make out its position easily enough. "The hunters approach from the northeast, so all we have to do is keep the sun just behind our right shoulders." It seemed logical enough to Pony, so she shrugged and let Elbrian lead and didn't mention to him that if they simply called out loudly, their fathers would likely hear them and guide them in. Elbrian picked his way determinedly, weaving about the bushy evergreens, not even looking back to make sure Pony was keeping up with him. He moved faster still when he heard the voices of the hunters. His heart pounded when he recognized his father's deep tones, though he couldn't make out what the man was saying. Pony caught up to him, even past him over that last expanse, leading the way through the tangle of two wide pines, pushing aside the prickly branches and bursting into a clearing right beside the returning party. Startled, almost feral reaction of the hunters froze Elbrian in his tracks and sent Pony ducking for cover. Elbrian hardly heard the sharp scolding his father offered, the boy's eyes basking in the sight, moving from the carcass of a caribou buck to a deer, to a line of conies, to... Elbrian and Giuseppe stood perfectly still, stricken. Their fathers, who had come forward to meet the impetuous children, to scold them again for being so far away from Dundalis, let the opportunity pass. The object on the fourth shoulder pole, each man realized, would be enough to get the lesson across. Sun was up, the day bright, and the village wide awake by the time Elbrian and Pony led the hunting party back to Dundalis. Expressions ran from excitement to awkward fear to blank amazement as the villagers took stock of the kills, especially the last carcass on the shoulder poles, a smallish humanoid form. "A goblin?" asked one woman, bending low to regard the creature's hideous features. The sloping forehead and the long, thin nose, the tiny but perfectly round eyes, now glazed over, sickly yellow. The creature's ears, pointed at the top and with a loose, flapping, fat lobe at the bottom, stuck out several inches from its head. The woman shuddered when she considered the mouth, a tangle of greenish-yellow fangs, all crooked but each angled inward. The chin was narrow, but the jowls wide with muscle. It wasn't difficult to imagine the power of the creature's bite, or the pain of feeling those nasty teeth. "Are they really that color?" asked another woman, and she dared to touch the creature's skin. "Or did it just turn that way after it died?" "Yellow and green," an old man answered firmly, though he had not been out on the hunt. Elbrian watched the wrinkled and bent elder, Brody Gentle by name, though the children usually called him Body Grabber in mock horror, teasing him and then running away. Old Brody was a snarling type, angry at the world and at his own infirmities, and an easy mark for children, always ready to give chase and never quick enough to make a catch. Elbrian considered the man's true name now, for the first time, and nearly laughed aloud at the contradiction of the surname with Brody's grouchy demeanor. "Early is a goblin," Brody continued, obviously enjoying the attention. "Big one, too. And they're yellow and green."
This here's Ozzy, y'all.
Questioning woman.
He's my
"Living
newest
and
edition.
dead, though this one's fast turning grey." He snickered as he finished, a sound of utter contempt that seemed to lend credence to his greater knowledge of the goblin race. Goblins were little-seen creatures. Many considered them more myth than truth. Even in Dundalis, and in other frontier villages nestled in the timberlands on the borders of the deep wilder lands, there had been no confirmed sightings of any goblins for longer than the villagers could remember, with the apparent exception of Brody Gentle. "You have seen goblins before?" asked Olwen Wyndham, Elbrian's father, and his tone and the fact that he crossed his large arms over his chest as he spoke showed he held many doubts. Brody Gentle scoffed at him. "Oft have I told the tales." The old man fumed. Olwen Wyndham nodded,
Oh,
not
it's
wanting to
okay,
get Brody
buddy.
into one of his legendary fits of outrage.
He's a little whiny.
Sitting by the hearth in the village's common house, Brody had recounted endless tales of his youth, of battling goblins, even Fomorian giants, in the first days of Dundalis, staking out the ground for proper folk. Most listened politely, but turned up their eyes and shook their heads whenever Brody looked away. "We had the word of a goblin sighting in Weedy Meadow," offered another man, referring to another village some 20 miles to the west of Dundalis. "A child's word," Olwen Wyndham promptly reminded them all, quieting nervous
What is
whispers
it?
before they could gain any momentum. "Well, we've much work to do, and you've tale to tell," Pony's mother intervened. "Better suited for the common house after a supper of venison stew." Olwen nodded, and the crowd gradually dispersed, one person taking a last, long look
Give me 1
at the
second,
gold,
everyone.
which was indeed
Oh, what
fast
is it,
turning
buddy?
grey. Elbrian and Pony lingered long by the corpse, studying it intently. Pony didn't miss her companion's derisive
We'll
snort.
go to bed here in a little bit, okay?
"Small as an 8-year-old, the boy explained, waving a dismissive hand at the goblin. That was something of an exaggeration, but indeed, the goblin wasn't much above 4 feet tall, and couldn't have weighed more than Elbrian's 90 pounds. "Perhaps it is a child," Pony offered. "You heard, body grabber,"
It's
Elbrian
okay,
countered.
buddy.
He screwed up his
I'm
face,
still
the
here.
ridiculous nickname sounding foolish.
Got getting used to
He said it was a big one.
my long nights.
Another snort. "Looks fierce," Pony insisted, bending low to study the creature more closely. She didn't miss Elbrian's third snort. "Remember the badger?" she asked quietly, stealing the boy's bluster. "Not a third the size of the goblin." Elbrian blanched and looked away. Earlier that year, at the beginning of summer, some of the younger children had snagged a badger in a noose. When they came into the village with the news, Elbrian, the oldest of their group, had taken command, leading the way back to the spot. He approached the snared creature boldly, only to find that it had chewed right through the leather bindings. When it came around at him, teeth bared, Elbrian had, so the legend, and among the children it was indeed a legend, said, run away so fast that he didn't even notice he was running straight up a tree, not even using his hands to grab a branch. The rest of the children had fled as well, but not so far that they could not witness Elbrian's ultimate humiliation, as the badger,
I think he just
some
wanted to make sure I was
vindictive
here.
enemy, had waited at
So
the
that
base
guy
of
back
Elbrian's
there,
tree, keeping
until he's
the
big
boy
enough to
up in the
let up
branch
here by
for more
himself.
than an hour. Stupid badger, Elbrian thought, and stupid Pony for opening that wound once again. He walked away without another word. Pony couldn't sustain her smile as she watched him go, wondering if she had pushed him a little too hard. Every villager was in the common house that night, Though most had already heard the tale of the goblin fight by then, the hunting party had come upon a band of 6 creatures, or actually, both groups had come upon each other, stepping out of the thick brush onto an open, rocky riverbank simultaneously, barely 20 paces apart. After a moment of shock, the goblins had thrown their spears, injuring one man. The ensuing fight had been brief and brutal, with many nicks and cuts to both sides, and even a couple of bites to the humans, before the goblins, outnumbered 2 to 1, had fled, disappearing into the brush as suddenly as they had appeared. The only serious wound to either side was the hit to the slain goblin, a spear thrust that had punctured the creature's lung. It had tried to flee with its companions, but fell short of the brush for lack of breath, and died soon after. Olwen Wyndon told the tale again in full to the gathering, trying hard not to embellish it. We spent 3 days looking, but found no more sign of the other goblins, he finished. Immediately a pair of mugs came up into the air from the side of the room. To Shane McMichael! The 2 mug holders bellowed together. Goblin Slayer! The cheer went up, and Shane McMichael, a quiet, slender young man, just a few years older than Elbrian, reluctantly came forward to stand beside Olwen in front of the blazing hearth. With much prodding, the man was prompted to tell of the fight, of the cunning twist and parry and the straightforward thrust that had come too soon for the goblin to completely dodge. Elbrian savoured every word, envisioning the battle clearly. How he envied Shane. Afterward, the conversation turned to an exchange of what other people had recently seen, of the report of a goblin sighting in Weedy Meadow, and even a few wild tales from Dundalis folk, claiming that they had noticed some huge tracks, but just hadn't said anything about it. Elbrian at first listened intently to every word, but gradually taking the cue from his father's posture, came to understand that most of the talk was no more than individual efforts to grab a bit of attention. It surprised Elbrian that adults would act that way, especially considering the gravity of the situation. Next came a discussion, led by Brody Gentle, of goblin kind in general, from the numerous small goblins to the rare and dangerous disfigured Fomorian giants. Brody spoke with an air of expertise, but few in the room hung on his every word. Even young Elbrian soon came to realize that the old man knew little more than anyone else concerning goblins, and Elbrian doubted that Brody had ever seen a Fomorian giant. Elbrian looked at Pony, who seemed to be growing quite bored by it all, and motioned to the door. She was out into the night before he got out of his chair. Duster, Elbrian insisted, joining her. The night was chill, and so the boy moved close to Pony, sharing their warmth. But we cannot deny the goblin, Pony replied, motioning to the shed where the creature had been placed. Your father's tale was real enough. I meant Brody. I know what you meant, said Pony, and I do not believe him either. Not completely. Elbrian's surprise at her qualification of the remark reflected clearly on his face. There are goblins, Pony explained. We know that well enough. So, perhaps those who first came to the edge of the Wilder Lands to settle Dundalis did have a few fights with them. Fomorians? Elbrian asked skeptically.
I'll be right back.
He shrugged, not willing to discount the possibility of giants. Not after viewing a dead goblin. Elbrian conceded the point, though he still thought Brody Gentle more bluster than truth. He couldn't hold that thought, though, or any other negative feelings, when Giuseppe turned to look him directly in the eye, when she, her face only a few inches from his own, rocked his olive-green eyes with her stare. Elbrian found his breath hard to come by. Pony was close, too close, and she wasn't backing away. She was coming closer, Elbrian realized, her head slowly drifting toward his, her lips so soft, in line with his. Panic hit him. wrestling hard with a jumble of other emotions that Elbrian did not understand. A part of him wanted to turn away, but another part, a larger and surprising part, would not let him move. The door to the common house opened with a crash, and both Pony and Elbrian immediately spun away from each other. The younger children came out in a mob, swarming around the older pair. "What are we going to do?" one of them asked. Elbrian and Pony exchanged curious looks. "We must be ready for when the goblins
Yeah,
come
he's
back,"
back asleep
another
again.
boy remarked. "The goblins were never here," Pony interjected. "But they will be," claimed the boy. "Christina says so." All eyes turned to Christina, a girl of 10, who always seemed to be staring at Elbrian. "Goblins always come back for their dead," she explained eagerly. "How do you know that?" Elbrian asked doubtfully, and his tone seemed to hurt the girl. He looked down and kicked the dirt with one foot. "My grandmother knows," she answered, her voice suddenly sheepish, and Elbrian felt a fool for making her so uncomfortable. All the gang was quiet, hanging on Elbrian's every word. Pony nudged him hard. Pony had told him many times that Christina was sweet for him, and the older girl, not viewing a 10-year-old as competition, had been charmed by the thought. "She probably does know," Elbrian said, and Christina looked up, suddenly beaming. "And it sounds right." He turned to the shed, and all the younger children flowed about him, following his gaze. "If the goblins do come back, we must be ready," Elbrian decided. He looked at Pony and winked, and was surprised when she returned the gesture with a serious frown. Perhaps this was more than a game. Chapter 2. True Believer. 25 stood in a line, cloaked in thick brown robes with voluminous sleeves and large hoods that were pulled low to hide their faces. Quiet and humble, they kept their heads bowed, their shoulders stooped, and their hands folded before them, though not a digit showed from beneath the folds of cloth, not a flash of flesh in the whole of the line. "Piety, dignity, poverty," the old Father Abbot, Dalebert Markwort, intoned in his nasal voice. He stood alone on the balcony above the main entrance of St. Mare Abel, the most prominent monastery in all of the kingdom of Ponce the Bear, in the northern temperate zone of Corona. Intertwined with the rocky cliffs of the southeastern coast, St. Mare Abel had stood solemn and dark for nearly a millennium, with each generation of monks adding their toil and craftsmanship to the already huge structure. Its grey rock walls seemed to grow right from the solid stone, an extension of the earth's power. Squat towers anchored every turn in the wall. Narrow windows showed that the place was built for somber reflection and defense. Visible parts of the monastery were impressive. The sea wall alone rose and melted back into the cliff face for more than a mile. But the bulk of the place could not be seen from beyond the walls. It was buried under the ground, in tunnels strong and square, in vast underground chambers, many smoky from the constant torchlight, others brightened by magical. 700 monks lived here, and another 200 servants, many of them never leaving the place except to go on short visits, usually to the market in the village of St. Mare Abel, some 3 miles inland. The new class of 25 stood one behind the other. As they were positioned according to height, Avelin de Briss, tall and large-boned, was near the back, with 22 before him, and only 2 behind. He could barely hear the abbot above the constant groan of the wind, weaving always through the many rocks. But Avelin hardly cared. For the majority of his 20 years, the young man had dreamed of this day. had set his sights on the Order of St. Maribel as surely as any general would focus on his next conquest. 8 years of formal study, 8 years of grueling testing had brought Avalon to this point. One of 25 remaining of the 2,000 12-year-olds who had begun the process, each desperately vying to gain admittance in the class of God's year 816. Avalon dared to peek out from under his hood at the handful of spectators lining the road before the monastery's front gates. His mother, Annalisa, and father, Jason, were among that small group, though his mother had taken ill and would not likely make it back to their home in the village of Umaneth, some 300 miles from the coast. Avalon knew with near certainty that this would be the last time he saw her, and likely the last time he'd see his father as well. Avalon was the youngest of 10, and his parents had been well into their 40s when he was born. His next youngest sibling was 7 years his senior, and so he wasn't really close to anything. By the time Avalon was old enough to understand the concept of family, half the children had already moved out of the family house. Life had been good for him, and he had been close to his parents, more so than any of his brothers or sisters. The bond had been particularly strong with Annalisa, a humble and spiritual woman who had encouraged her youngest child to follow the path of God from his earliest recollections. Avalon dropped his gaze once more, fearful of discipline should he be caught peeking out from under his hood. Rumors hinted that students of St. Maribel had been dismissed for less. He pictured his mother on that day many years before, when he had announced that he would enter St. Maribel. The tears that had come to her, the smile, gentle, even divine. That image, that confirmation, was burned into Avalon's thoughts as clearly as if it had been painted and magically illuminated on the inside of his eyelids. How much younger and more vibrant Annalisa had seemed. The last few years had been hard on her, one illness after another. She was determined to see this day, though, and Avalon understood that, with its passing, with his entering St. Maribel, the woman would no longer fight against mortality. It was all right, to Avalon and to Annalisa. Her goals had been met, her life lived in the spirit of generosity. Avalon knew he would cry when word reached him of her passing. But he knew, too, that his tears would be selfish, tears for himself and his loss, and not for Annalisa, whom he knew would be in a better place. Grinding sound, the great gates sliding open, brought the young man from his contemplations. "Do you willingly enter the service of God?" Father Abbot Dalebert Markwort asked. The 25 responded with a unified, "Yes, say I." "Show then your desire," the Father Abbot demanded. "Pass ye the gauntlet of willing suffering." Lines shuffled forward. "My God, our God, one God," they chanted, and they lifted their voices even higher when the first of their ranks entered the gauntlet, stepping between 2 lines of monks, those who remained of the classes of the previous 2 years, all armed with heavy wooden paddles. Avalon heard the slaps of wood, the unintentional groans, even an occasional cry from the younger students near the front. He fell deeper within himself, chanted with all his strength, and listened to his own words, grabbing at his faith and building with it a wall of denial. So strong was he in meditation that he did not even feel the first few blows, and those that slapped against him afterwards seemed a minor thing, a momentary pain, lost in the ultimate sweetness that awaited him. All his life, he had wanted to live in service to God. All his life, he had dreamed of this day. Now was his time, his day. He came through the gauntlet without uttering a single sound beyond the range of his controlled, even-toned chant. That fact was not lost on Father Abbot Markwart, nor on any of the other monks watching the initiation of God's Year 816. None of the others in Avelin's line could make such a claim. Not one in several years had walked the gauntlet of willing suffering with so minimal complaint. Huge stone gates of St. Maribel slammed shut with a resounding crash that jolted Annalisa de Bris violently. Her husband held her tight then, understanding her pain, both physical and emotional. Annalisa knew, as Avelin had known, that she would never see her son in this world again. She had given him over to the service of God, to her ultimate joy, but still, the very real human pain of final parting tugged at her weak heart, stole the strength from her tiny arms and legs. Jason supported her, always. He, too, had tears in his eyes, but unlike Annalisa's, which were of joy, Jason's tears came from a mix of emotions, ranging from simple sadness to anger. He had never spoken openly against Avelin's decision, but privately, the pragmatic man had wondered if his son wasn't merely throwing his life away. Couldn't say that to frail Annalisa, he knew. A simple word could break her. Jason only hoped that he could somehow get her home, into her own bed, before she died. Thoughts of his parents could not hold Avelin's attention as the group crossed the wind-blown courtyard and entered the grand entrance hall of St. Maribel. Now the young man did utter an unintended sound, a gasp of disbelief and delight. The place was not bright,
right back here,
having only a handful of tiny windows set high up on the tall walls. Torches burned at regular intervals, and the massive beams that supported the hall's ceiling seemed to dance in their light. Avelin had never seen a place so huge, could not comprehend the effort that had been expended to put this hall together. His own village of Humanef would fit inside this one hall, with room left over to stable the horses. The tapestries that lined the place were no less magnificent and intriguing, woven into scenes that held 1,000,000 details in every square foot, sights within sights, subtle lines and smaller images that caught Avelin's eyes and his curiosity, and would not let them go. The tapestries covered the walls almost completely, allowing for windows and for racked displays of shining weapons. Swords and spears, great axes, long daggers, and a myriad of pole arms with hooked blades and prodding tips that Avelin did not know. Suits of armor of various designs stood as silent sentinels. Every type, from the overlapping wooden plates of the ancient Pyrenees to the strong metal plate mail designed for Hans the Bear's Allheart Brigade, the personal guards of the king, whoever that might be at the moment. Along one wall stood a gigantic statue, 15 feet or more, dressed in a heavy leather jacket, trimmed in fur and set with spiked metal plates, heavy iron.
Excuse me.
A Fomorian, Avelin realized with a very visible shudder, in the typical battle dress of its warlike race. Beside it, dramatically, were two tiny figures, one just over half Avelin's height, the other a bit taller, but slender and lithe. The shorter of the pair wore a light leather tunic and arm shields, metal sleeves hooked over the figure's thumbs and running from wrists to The red beret gave the figure's identity away. It was a Powery mannequin, Avelin realized. The cruel, dwarf-like Poweries were also called Bloody Caps for their gruesome habit of dipping the berets, enchanted pieces made of specially prepared human skin, in their victims' blood until the cap took on, and kept, a shining red hue. The statue beside the Powery, sporting a pair of nearly translucent wings, had to be a representation of an elf, the mysterious Tuel Alfar. Its limbs were slender and long, and its armor a silver shining coat of fine interlocking links. Avlin wanted to go closer to it to study the stern facial features and the incredible craftsmanship of the armor. That thought, and the potential punishment it might bring, reminded the young man of where he was, and that many seconds, minutes perhaps, had slipped past him unnoticed. He blushed deeply and lowered his head, taking a quick glance all around. He calmed quickly, though, seeing that all of his classmates were similarly entranced, and that the Father Abbot and the other ranking monks seemed not to care. Initiates were supposed to be overwhelmed, Avlin suddenly realized, and he looked again around the room, this time more openly, nodding as he began to understand the true nature of the place. The Order of St. Maribel was noted not just for its pious and humble priests, but also for their long reputation as fierce warriors. The 8 years of Avlin's pre-training had included only minor instructions in the martial arts, but he had suspected that the physical qualifications of the Brotherhood, the ability to fight, would become more prominent once inside the monastery. To Avlin, it was more of a distraction than anything else. All that the gentle and idealistic young man wanted was to serve God, to foster peace, to heal, and to comfort. To Avlin de Bris, nothing in all the world, not the treasures of a dragon's hoard, nor the powers of a king, could outweigh that accomplishment. Now, he was on the other side of the great stone gates of St. Maribel. Now he had his chance. So he believed. Chapter 3. A lingering kiss. Things quieted quickly in Dundalis. As the days after the patrol's return stretched out into an uneventful week, and then a second, thoughts of the slain goblin took second place to the very real threat of winter's onset. There was much to be done. The last harvesting, preparing the meat, patching holes in the cottages, and cleaning the chimneys. Every passing day, danger from the goblins seemed more and more remote. Every passing day, fewer and fewer men and women went out of the town to walk a patrol. Elbrian and his friends, some as young as 6 or 7, saw their chance unfolding. For the adults, the spectre of the goblins brought a sobering wariness, and then a troublesome distraction. For the younger villagers, whose imaginations were far livelier, and whose sense of adventure hadn't yet been tempered by any real loss, thoughts of goblin raids brought excitement, a call to arms, a time for heroes. Elbrian and his friends had offered to walk patrols since the first day of the hunting party's return. Each morning, they approached the village leaders, and each morning they were politely refused and quickly put to some more mundane task. Even Elbrian, who would be entering the realm of adults that coming spring, had spent almost all the previous week with his head up a dirty chimney. The young man held faith and passed his hopes down the line. The adults were tiring of their patrols, he knew, and were growing more and more confident that the goblin incident was a chance thing, a single unfortunate meeting, and that those creatures which had been chased away would not return to the site of the battle, let alone try to track the humans back to their village, some 30 miles away. Now, with 2 calm weeks behind them, and no further sightings except for a few wild rumors that were discounted by even the most cautious of Dundalis's folk, Elbrian recognized the lessening of resistance in his father's voice. He was not surprised that morning when Olwen, instead of shaking his head, bent low and sketched out in the dirt a rough map of the area, explaining to his son where he and his friends should be positioned. Elbrian was surprised, though, and pleasantly so, when Olwen then presented him with the family sword, a short, thick blade of 2 foot length. It wasn't an impressive weapon, Its blade showed many nicks and more than a little rust, but it was one of the few real swords in the village. Make certain that every one of your group is well armed, Olwen said seriously, and make sure that each knows the value and the danger of his or her weapon. Olwen knew what this meant to his son, and if he had smiled or let on in any way that the patrols were no longer really necessary, he would have stolen something from Elbrian, a measure of importance that the young man desperately needed to feel. Do you think it wise to let the children go out with weapons? Shane McMichael asked Olwen, coming up to the large man soon after Elbrian had run off. Or to let them go out at all? Olwen snorted and shrugged his muscular shoulders. We cannot spare the men and women, he replied. And there is the other patrol in the Vale, the most likely route for our enemies to take, should they come. Olwen gave another snort, a helpless sound that surprised McMichael, who'd always known Olwen as the coolest and most confident head in all the village. Besides, Olwen went on, if the goblins or Fomorians get close enough to Dundalis for my son and his friends to see, they will be as well off out in the woods as in the village. Shane McMichael did not argue the point, though the weight of it grew steadily on his shoulders. Since Hans the Bear had been at peace for many years, and goblins and evil giants receded from the thoughts of most people to become little more than fireside tales, Dundalis had not been built for defense. The village was not even walled, as earlier settlements near the wilder lands had been, and the folk were not well armed. Hunting party of 12 carried with them more than half the total real weapons of the 100 folk of Dundalis. Olwen was right, Shane McMichael knew, and he shuddered with the thought. If the goblins got close enough for Elbrian and the others to spot them, then all the village would be in danger. Olwen started away, and McMichael calmed and moved to follow. He really didn't think any goblins would come. None in the village except for pessimistic old Brody Gentle spoke of such darkness. The patrols began that day, with 15 youngsters walking the rim of the bowl-shaped vale that held Dundalis. There was one other patrol, a handful of older teenagers venturing further out, down among the pines and fluffy caribou moss to the northeast. Each of this group nodded respectfully at his younger counterparts as he passed them on the rim. Some mentioned that Elbrian's patrols would serve as their vital liaison with the village proper. After that exchange of compliments, even the passing of endless, uneventful hours could not dampen the thrill for the youngsters. Elbrian and his friends were not being left out this time, were not being treated as mere children. As each day slipped past, the weather growing a bit colder, the wind shifting more to the north, the 25 in Elbrian's group perfected their patrol routes. Elbrian split them into 4 teams of 5 and one of 3, which would move from group to group gathering information, while he and Pony served as anchor to them all, holding a position along the highest ridge, directly north of Dundalis, overlooking the valley of evergreens and caribou moss.
There you go.
There were several complaints about this arrangement at first, mostly from the older boys who thought that they should serve as
He's getting a little pushy.
Some even resorted to teasing Elbrian about his growing relationship with Pony, prompting him to ride the pony, and other such crudities. Brian took it all in stride, with the exception of any insults to Pony, which he promptly informed the teasers would bring them serious and painful retaliation. He didn't care about their teasing him, though, having at last admitted to himself, and openly, that Pony was his best and most trusted friend. Let the children have their fun. Elbrian, coming into manhood, whispered to Pony as the groups split up. When he wasn't looking her way, when he had moved off to set up a windbreak of dead wood, Pony regarded him knowingly, a warm smile spreading over her face. Something else watched the young man from a perch in one of the thicker pines in the ridge. It moved nimbly from branch to branch, crossing over to nearby trees with barely a whisper. It shadowed Elbrien's every move, studying the young leader intently. Pony and Elbrien, alert as they were, the creature was invisible and unnoticed. Even if they had looked intently the creature's way, its movements were so fluid and graceful, and always under the cover of pine boughs, that they would have considered the sway of the branches no more than the movements of the wind, or a grey squirrel. Another week passed by uneventfully. Work in the village was at full pace, readying for winter. On the ridge and in the vale beyond, the primary enemy became bored. Elbrien lost half a dozen of his patrol at the beginning of that second week, the youths explaining that their parents needed them about the house and would not let them go out. Elbrien did not miss that every one of those soldiers seemed grateful to be relieved of the dull patrols. Elbrien continued his diligent work, though, reorganizing the routes to cover more ground since he was down to 3 teams of 5 with a couple of messengers. "We'll lose Seamus tomorrow," Pony said, as they sat side by side in a hollow on the high ridge, sheltered from the chill wind by a pair of large pines. The day
He's an apple-head
clouds were rolling
chihuahua.
into the afternoon sun. His mother told me this morning this would be his last day out. Elbrien prodded the ground with the tip of his sword. "His patrol group goes to Forley," he said, matter of fact. Pony recognized the frustration in his voice, though he did well to hide it. Elbrien was watching his first command crumbling about him, his soldiers being taken away so that they could help patch roofs or shore up barns. Pony sympathized with the young man. But logically, this was the best scenario they could have hoped for. They've been called back home because no enemy has come, she gently reminded him. Better this than for your patrol to have been truly necessary. Elbrien looked at her, little luster showing in his normally bright green eyes. "Or maybe we were necessary," Pony quickly added, trying to salvage some measure of the young man's pride. "How do we know that goblins have not ventured near Dundalis?" Elbrien cocked his head and ran a hand through his thick layers of straight, light brown hair. "As their scouts did come near us," Pony went on. "Perhaps they saw our patrols and realized they would not have an easy time of it against the village. We are just children," Elbrien said disgustedly. Pony shook her head. "And all but the smallest of our group is larger than a goblin," she replied without hesitation, and that truth seemed to lend some credence to her reason. "Is not the best army the one so strong that enemies will not dare attack?" Elbrien didn't answer, but that familiar sparkle lit up his eyes. He turned back to regard the ground in front of him, and the wild design he was cutting with the sword. Pony smiled.
He's pretty much
feeling
just
that she had
a
done well.
small
It pleased her
chihuahua.
greatly to help out Elbrien, to guard his emotions. She didn't really believe goblins had come near enough to see the patrols, and neither did Elbrien. But at least this way he could hold out some reason to believe his first real effort at something important by adult standards had not been in vain. The simple fact that they could not be absolutely certain offered Elbrien all the encouragement he needed. Pony dared to reach out then. The connection was too strong to let the moment pass. She cupped Elbrien's chin in one hand and gently turned him back to face her. "You have done a wonderful job out here," she said softly. "Not alone," he started to reply, but she stopped him by putting a finger of her free hand across his lips. Only then did Elbrien realize how close they were, their faces barely 2 inches apart. He felt warm suddenly, a bit dizzy, a bit frightened. When he drifted closer, she kissed him, full on the lips. Elbrian was terrified and thrilled all at once. He thought he should pull away, spit on the ground, and yell, "Girl poison!" as was the expected response. As had been his response all the other times Pony or any of the other girls had tried to kiss him. He didn't want to do that. The last notion in his mind was to pull away. He realized then that it had been a long, long time since Pony had tried to kiss him, at least a year. Had she feared his reaction? Had she known he would have spit and yelled at girl poison? A chance that would have been taken up by every boy in the village. Or had she known he wasn't ready until now to be kissed? That was it. The young man decided. As the gentle kiss, their closed mouths barely touching, lingered on and on. Pony knew him so very well, better than he knew himself. The last few days together, alone for 4 of every 5 hours, had brought them even closer. And now this. Elbrian didn't want it to end. He shifted in his seat, first lifted the short sword, then, realizing that it would be awkward, perhaps even dangerous, dropped it to the ground. He dared to put his arms around Pony's back, dared to pull her closer, feeling the strangely interesting curves and bumps of her body against his own as they came together. He fought a fit of panic, not knowing what he should do, where he should move his hands, or if he should move his hands at all. All Elbrian knew was that he didn't want the kiss to end, that he wanted something more, though he wasn't really sure what that might be. He wanted to be closer to Pony, physically and emotionally. This was Pony, his dearest friend, the girl, no, the young woman whom he had grown to love. He would pass into manhood that spring, Pony into womanhood the following autumn. After, he would ask for Pony's hand. That notion brought fear, and Elbrian tried to pull away, then did break the hold long enough to catch his breath. Again, the fears passed, lost in a swirl of warmth as he looked at Pony's shining blue eyes, at her smile, as genuine and joyful as anything Elbrian had ever seen. She hardly had to nudge him to get him to kiss her again, and they settled even more comfortably together. The kiss shifted from curiosity to urgency, then back to gentleness. Their clothes ruffled and seemed more of an obstacle than a necessity, though the air was chill. Elbrian had the feeling he would be warmer without them. His hands did move now, as he lost his fear of touching Pony. He caressed her neck, ran his hands down her side and along the outside of her strong leg. He was shocked as her mouth opened a little bit, and he felt her tongue against his lips, so soft and inviting. Moment, this most precious moment in all of Elbrian's young life. And then suddenly it was gone, destroyed by a horrified and horrifying scream. The couple jumped apart and to their feet, staring wide-eyed down the long slope to the village, at the swarming forms, at the large plume of smoke, too large to come from any chimney, rising from one of the houses. The goblins had come. Hundreds of miles away, in a windswept, foreboding land called the Barbican, in a deep cave in a mountain called Aida, the dactyl basked in the sensation of war. The demon creature could feel the screams of those dying in Dundalis, though it had no idea where the battle was being waged.
Be right back, everyone.
A rogue goblin chieftain, perhaps, or one of the many Powery raiding parties acting on their own initiative, bringing misery to the wretched humans. The dactyl could not take direct credit, but that mattered little. It had awakened, darkness rising, and already its influence was spreading throughout Corona. Already the goblins, the Poweries, or one of the other races the demon could claim as minions, had felt that awakening, and had been given the courage to act. creature flexed its wings and settled back in the throne it had shaped from the obsidian that had formerly served as its tomb. Yes, the dark vibrations were running strong through the stone, the sensation of war, of human agony. It was good to be awake. Chapter 4. The Death of Dundalis. Elbrion and Pony were stunned and terrified for many seconds. It was too unreal, too beyond their experience and expectations. Images assaulted them, mingling with imagined scenes even more horrifying. And amid all of it welled utter denial, the hope against obvious reality that this simply could not be happening. Persephone moved first, a single, tiny step, her arm reaching out helplessly. That almost involuntary motion seemed to break her trance, and she let out a shriek for her mother and ran full out for home. Elbrion thought to call out for her, but indecision held his voice and kept him from immediately following. What should he do? What were his responsibilities? A warrior would know these things. Great effort, Elbrion tore his gaze from the dreadful spectacle below and glanced all around. He should organize his friends. Yes, that was the course, he decided. He would gather together his scouts, perhaps even call in the older scouts from the Vale, and charge down into Dundalis in tight formation, anchoring the defense. But time was against him. He glanced about again, turned to the Evergreen and Caribou Moss Valley, and started to call out, thinking to bring in the patrol of older men. Elbrion fell back behind the twin pines, catching the shout in his throat, gasping for breath. Just over the ridge, facing away from him, he saw the nearly bald head, the pointed ears, the chalky yellow skin of an enemy. With trembling fingers, Elbrion retrieved his short sword, and then he sank even deeper into the hollow, paralyzed with terror. He wasn't armed, having left her club back at the ridge. She didn't care, for she wasn't really running into battle. Girl was running to find her mother and father, to feel their comforting hugs, to hear her mother telling her that everything would be all right. She wanted to be a little girl again, wrapped tight in her bed sheets, and tighter in her mother's embrace, waking from a nightmare. This time, though, she was awake. This time the screams were real. Pony ran on desperately, blinded by tears. She stumbled to the base of what she thought was a tree, then nearly fainted as it shifted suddenly, as the Fomorian giant, huge club in hand, took a long step away from her. If she had had any breath in her lungs, she would have screamed, and if she had screamed, the giant would have noticed her and squashed her where she stood. But its focus was the village, and not some insignificant little girl. And in a few loping strides it left Pony far behind. She scrambled back to her feet, picked up a couple of rocks of a good size for throwing, and ran on, taking a course that would parallel, but not too closely, the giant. Now, as she entered the area of battle, as she saw the confusion, the fierce fighting, the dead bodies on the road, she was no more a little girl. Now she remembered her training, forced herself to think clearly and concisely. Goblins swarmed everywhere, and Pony spotted at least 2 other giants, 15 feet tall and perhaps 1,000 pounds of chiseled muscle. Her friends and family could not win. That logical, adult part of Pony, the part that knew that the time of fending off nightmares with bedsheets was long past, told her without doubt that Dundalis could not survive. Plan B, she whispered aloud, using the words to steady her thinking. The rules of survival, taught to every child in Wilderlands settlements, declared that the first priority in any catastrophe was to save the village. If that failed, the next task was to save as many individuals as possible. Plan B. They picked her way around the back of the nearest houses, moving in and out of the shadows. She peeked around the corner and stood transfixed. On the main road of Dundalis, just on the other side of this house, a fierce battle raged. Only saw Alwyn Wyndon first, standing tall in the middle of the human line, calling out commands, forming the group of 20 men and women into a tight circle as enemies came at them from nearly every direction. Boney's first instincts were to try and join that battle group, but she quickly surmised that she would never get in. She clenched her fist hopefully as Alwyn Wyndon smashed a goblin's head, dropping the wretch to the dirt. Then she held her breath as she noticed the man behind Alwyn, parrying wildly as 2 goblins prodded at him with sharp spears. Her father. Elbrian held his breath, gasped once, then held it again. He didn't know what to do, then cursed himself silently for what he had already done. In the hollow of the twin pines, he had lost sight of his enemy, the first and fatal mistake. Now he had to work hard to deny his terror, had to climb above the emotion and the physical barrier, and remember the many lessons his father had given him. A warrior knows his enemy, locates his enemy, and watches its every move. Silently mouthing that litany, Elbrian inched his face toward the edge of the pine. He hesitated momentarily, at the very last instant, certain the goblin was just on the other side, weapon poised to smash him as soon as he peeked around. A warrior knows his enemy. A sudden shift brought the field beyond the pines back into view, and Elbrian nearly collapsed with relief when he saw the goblin had not moved and was still facing away from him, staring into the northern valley. That relief fast transformed into a sinking feeling as Elbrian realized the meaning of this creature's positioning. The patrol in the valley had been spotted, perhaps had even been already engaged, and this goblin had been set a sentry, watching for any other potential human reinforcements while its companions sacked the village. The thought sparked anger in the young man, enough to overcome his fear. He clenched more tightly his short sword and slowly brought one leg up under him. Without hesitation, for if he paused, he knew his courage would surely falter, Elbrian slipped out from behind the protection of the tree. Half walking, half crawling, he moved closer to the goblin, quickly covering a third of the distance. Then he wanted to turn back, to run into the hollow and cover his face. The sounds behind him, from his home, bolstered him, as did the smell of burning wood carried by the wind up to the ridge. With a grimace of determination, Elbrian halved the distance to his foe. No turning back now. He scanned the area, and as soon as he was confident that this creature was alone, he stood up and rushed out. 5 running strides brought him to the goblin, who didn't hear his approach until the last second. Even as the goblin began to turn, Elbrian's sword came down hard on its head. The sword bounced out wide. Elbrian was surprised by the force of the impact, and that his sword had not cut into the goblin's skull. He thought for one terrible moment he hadn't hit the thing hard enough, that it would turn and skewer him with its crude spear. Desperately, the young man scrambled to the side, trying to ready a defense. The goblin staggered weirdly, dropped its weapon, and fell to its knees. Its head lolled from side to side. Elbrian saw the bright red gash, the white of split bone, the greyish brain. The goblin stopped moving. Its chin came to rest on its head, and it held the kneeling pose. Quite dead. Dead. Elbrian felt his guts churning and labored.
Hey, Poison, how you doing?
The weight
Morning.
of his first kill descended upon him, bowing his shoulders, nearly driving him to his knees. Again, it was the smell
Hope
of
you've been
his
doing
burning
well,
village
bro.
that cleared his head. He had no time now to ponder, and any sympathetic notions that he might have captured the goblin instead of killing it seemed perfectly ridiculous. He looked ahead at the Evergreen Vale and noted, to his dismay, that a fight was going on down there. Then he looked back at the larger battle for Dundalis, where his parents were fighting, to where Pony had run. Pony! The desperate young man whispered aloud, and before Elbrian even consciously knew what he was doing, he saw the trees going past him in a blur as he sprinted down the slope towards Dundalis. Pony made her way.
Oh shit. At least you got a little sleep.
Wondering how she might get past.
Give me 1 second, I'll be right back.
A cry of agony within the house froze her in place, and she leaned heavily on the frame for support. She took a moment to consider where she was, whose house this was, and she stifled a sob. No time for that, she scolded herself, and she focused on the battle raging on the road. Again her shoulders sagged, for though many goblins lay dead or dying on the bloodied ground about the ring of desperate fighters, several humans were down as well. And the goblin ranks, for all the carnage, remained deep and seemed undiminished. Above it all stood Olwen, proud and strong and unshakable. He clobbered yet another goblin, bashing its ugly skull, then raised his arm and called out, trying to rally the others. Pony blinked curiously, for Olwen's arm did not come down, seemed to be going up, up, up. She saw the look of horror and pain that came over the man, then looked higher, past his stretched shoulder, his elbow. Giant's hand covered the tall man's entire forearm. Blocked by the wall of the house, Pony couldn't follow the man's ascent. She wanted to yell out for someone to help doomed Olwen, wanted to scream simply for the sake of screaming. And then Olwen came flying back into sight, falling in a broken heap on the road right in the midst of the valiant fighters. Their ranks broke apart. They ran every which way, most getting no more than a couple of strides before being buried under a wave of swarming goblins. Pony lost sight of her father immediately, mercifully. She tried to sort out the mob, saw another person, the woman who had taught her to read and write, get pulled down to the ground, saw the goblin's spear fast following. And then Pony turned away, stumbling to the back of the house, holding her churning stomach. There were no lines of defense anymore, no organized pockets of resistance. Everything was confusion, screams, and cries of pain. Pony didn't know where to turn, where to run. She saw the image of dead Olwen again, and the last glimpse of her father. She turned back toward the road, hoping that her dad would come for her, would somehow rush out of the jumble and scoop her away from the danger, would make everything better, as he'd always done. As if in a grotesque mockery of that hope, a goblin marched around that corner, bearing down on the girl. Pony let out a cry, hurled one of her stones at the creature, and ran off. Anger held her in place just around the back of the house. She stopped and braced herself, measuring the goblin's footsteps. As it rounded the corner, the girl snapped back her elbow with all her strength, catching the charging creature right under the chin. Pony spun and jumped on it, flailing wildly with both fists, kicking and kneeing viciously. Stronger than its little body would indicate, the goblin finally pushed her aside and turned its spear. Elbrian! The call brought the sprinting lad to a skidding halt. He caught the trunk of a young maple and swung around it, turning in the direction of the voice. Carly Dan Aubrey, one of the younger scouts, staggered toward him, his face ashen, both hands clenched firmly to his right side, at his waist. Elbrian saw the dark stain near those hands. Elbrian! The 9-year-old boy called again, stumbling forward. Elbrian ran out to meet him, caught him as he fell. The older boy moved quickly to inspect the wound, forcing Carly's hands away. Elbrian grimaced, and Carly whimpered and nearly vomited when Elbrian's hand brushed against the broken tip of a spear jutting from Carly's side. Elbrian pulled back his trembling hand, staring wide-eyed at the bright
Yeah, Christopher.
Carly clutched desperately at the wound again, but he could not hope to stem the blood. Elbrian forced himself to remain steady, to think clearly. He had to get his own shirt off and use it somehow to wrap the wound, and quickly. He tore off his overcoat and pulled open his leather vest, quickly unbuttoning the sleeves of his white shirt. Then he saw the goblin, coming fast, half a spear in its hands. It raised the shaft like a club, bearing down on him. Elbrian grabbed for his short sword, tried to bring it up in front of him, and fell back as the goblin dove on him. Elbrian flat on his back. Down they rolled together. Elbrian's sword was up against the creature's side, had cut in a bit, but the angle was wrong, and the goblin's grip surprisingly strong, preventing the boy from driving the weapon home. Over and over they rolled, tumbling down the slope, punching and thrashing. The ugly goblin face, all twisted teeth and long pointy nose, was barely inches from Elbrian's face, and closer still when the creature began to butt the boy. Elbrian felt his nose crack, felt the warmth of his blood running.
Go down.
He struggled harder.
So you had a good
let him drive his
night's
sword home.
sleep.
Elbrian tugged more fiercely with his other hand instead, increasing the pace of the roll. He caught his ankles on a tree trunk, but kicked off, not daring to stop, and the goblin came right over him. Still the creature held on stubbornly, pulling Elbrian over, and they began to roll sidelong again, heads to feet. On the first roll, Elbrian saw his new advantage, and on the second, the young man poked the elbow of his sword arm out, so it hit the ground and was braced. When the goblin came over, its own weight forced it down on Elbrian's sword. The creature went berserk, kicking and thrashing, flopping like a landed fish. Elbrian first tried to defend himself, but when that seemed futile, went on the offensive instead, brutally turning and twisting his blade. The air rolled hard into the trunk of another tree, and the goblin abruptly stopped its thrashing. Elbrian, dazed, his breath blasted away, nearly fainted. His thoughts came back in a terrifying rush, and he tore free his sword and began hacking wildly, cutting the goblin again and again. He crawled out from under the thing, but kept on attacking it savagely, primally, his blows wrought of sheer terror. Finally, he stopped, realizing it was dead, that it could no longer hurt him. He knelt over it, trying to catch his breath, which would not seem to come to him.
Oh, down.
Carly
Yeah, that always sucks when the garbage collection comes.
He dashed back up the slope, finally getting to the boy. Cold, Carly mouthed quietly. Elbrian fell to his knees, reaching for the wound, gingerly touching the spear, and wondering if he should pull it free. He looked at the boy and held his breath. Carly was dead. Tony ran off, stumbled and fell, then scrambled on all fours, anything to get away. The goblin was behind her. She could imagine it readying its spear, lining up her vulnerable back. She cried out and fell around a corner, flat on her face. Realizing she hadn't been hit by anything, she put her feet back under her and ran on. Around the back of the house, Thomas Ault, Pony's father, tore his dagger free and let the dead goblin fall to the ground. He looked plaintively at the corner around which his daughter had run, hoping, praying she would somehow escape. Thomas had done all he could. He felt the sting of the light spears, 6 of them, in his back, his side, deep in one thigh. He heard the footsteps as the band of pursuing goblins closed the distance to him. He prayed Pony would get away. Before Elbrian could start back toward the town, he saw the shadows moving among the trees in the area from which Carly had come. He knew these were not his other friends, knew instinctively the others had fallen. He moved slowly, quietly, away from Carly's body, taking cover behind a larger tree. 7 goblins came into sight, trotting easily down the slope. They hooted and laughed when they spotted the dead boy, then hooted even louder when they saw their fallen companion, not even pausing as they passed. Elbrian wanted to jump out at them, to slash them all. Wisdom overruled his rage, though, and he stayed hidden and let them pass. Then he stalked after them, his bloody sword in his bloody hand, hoping one of the creatures would stray from its friends. The smoke was growing thicker down in the village now. The screams had diminished, but when he crossed an area that offered him a clear view of Dundalis, Elbrian saw the scrambling forms were still thick about the place. The young man knew it was hopeless, knew that his village was lost, knew all of his friends, his parents, his pony were gone. Elbrian knew it, yet he did not slow his pace and did not alter his course. He was beyond grief, beyond logic, with no tears to cry. He would go down to Dundalis. He would kill every goblin he could catch. He saw the dead, saw the dying. She didn't know why she hadn't yet been caught, but as she darted from shadow to shadow, from the side of one burning building to the next, she knew that her luck would not hold out for long. All thought of rescuing anyone was gone. All that she wanted now was to get far, far away. But how? The roads were thick with goblins, ablaze. They showed no mercy. Pony saw one woman beg for her life, offer herself to the goblins circling about her. They hacked her down. Noose was getting tighter, Pony knew. As villagers died, more and more goblins were set free to run about. She looked in every direction, trying to find some course out of the town to the trees. But there was no escape. No way to get beyond Dundalis without being seen. And there were other goblins in the woods, coming in a few at a time. No escape. Pony squeezed in tight between two buildings and put her head against the wall. She wondered if it would be better to run out into the road and get it over with. Better that than to wait, she mumbled determinedly. But she found that she could not do it. That her most basic instinct for survival would not let her. Pony took a deep breath. She felt the heat against her hands as this house, too, started to burn. Now where could she run? The girl cocked her head, suddenly realizing exactly where she was. This was Shane McMichael's house in front of her. Alwyn Wyndham's right behind her. Alwyn's house. Elbrian's house. Elbrian's new house. He remembered the building of the place only 2 years previously. The whole village had buzzed about the house because Alwyn Wyndham was laying a stone foundation. Pony fell to her knees and began to scrape the ground at the base of Alwyn's house. Her fingers bled. She felt the heat growing behind her, but she dug on desperately. And her hand broke through into an open area. She reached deeper, perhaps a foot and a half down, and her hand met cold, wet ground. Alwyn had used large slabs for the base, and, as Pony suspected, the house hadn't completely settled. Smoke grew thick about.
I'll be right back, everyone.
Alwyn's house, too, went up in flames. Still she dug, widening the hole, trying desperately to squeeze under the slab. The angry young man didn't have long to wait. The goblin band, sentries apparently, and not part of the attacking force, did not continue down towards Dundalis, but split ranks and filtered left and right into the trees. Bin went left, shadowing a group of 3. He heard the continuing screams in Dundalis, more of a pitiful weeping now than any cries of resistance. He saw the houses burning and was close enough to realize that his own house was among them. That only fueled the young man's outrage. He stalked quietly from tree to tree, and when one of the goblins paused and fell behind the others, he was quickly to the spot. The kill was swift, a single thrust through the creature's ribs, but not quiet, for the goblin managed to let out a dying cry. Brian tore free his sword and started to run, but too late. He swiped left and right, picking off a pair of twisting spears, as the two other goblins bore down on him, howling and shouting. Their eyes so full of glee, so uncaring for the fallen comrade. Unnerved Elbrian, and he tried hard not to look at them, tried to concentrate on their stabbing spears. All the while he was backtracking, realizing he had to flee before the other group answered the howling call. The goblin on his left came in hard and straight. Elbrian snapped his sword over and around the spear, angling it past on his right, and he skittered out to the left, up the slope, gaining the higher ground. All advantage was lost as the young man stumbled, the loose earth slipping out from under his foot. The other goblin ran around the back of its companion and moved higher, coming in at Elbrian from above.
I'm caught into this life for tonight.
He threw himself backward, put a foot under him, and kicked off, flying past the turning spear of the first goblin, and rushing to get out of range of the second.
Everyone can stop by.
He slashed out with his
all
sword
your
as he
support.
careened past,